Hey, what is up guys, and welcome to part 3 of the RAPTOR series. In this tutorial we'll be cleaning up the mesh, so we can go texture painting in the next step. Cleaning the mesh up and making it a little bit simpler will help us have a really nice rendering result without too many weird sculpting artifacts, make it better 3D printable, and have a better painting experience later on. So yeah, let's head into Blender. So this is where we left off last time with our awesome raptor with our sculpted detail. Now the very first thing I want to do is remove some of these faces. So for these faces are all just fine, they're fine where they are. But there are some faces that are so small, for example on the teeth. I'll just head into edit mode here so you can see the faces a little bit better. If I zoom in to the teeth all the way, you can see that there are some really fine faces over here. Now these are so fine they would never show up in the render or even be 3D printed. So we don't need these vertices actually. They're just bugging the software down, making it slower. So the first thing we'll do is remove doubles. It's called remove doubles because Blender will try to merge vertices that are really close together. So it won't merge vertices that are really far. But what it would do, for example, is take this two vertices that are really close together, bring them even closer, and then when they're together, just snap them together and make it into one surface. But we can do this automatically. So we'll press A couple of times until all of our mesh is selected. And here under the properties panel, under tools, we can find the remove doubles. So we'll press that. Now we can see that the software removes 94,000 faces. And well, that's great, but we have to check the scale of the resulting tries, the resulting faces. Right now the scale is quite good, but you might have really big faces and really coarse geometry. For example, if you put the merge distance, if you divide that by 2, let's see, you get a much finer mesh. So if you want that, you can divide it by 2, or just multiply by 2, or 2 times 2, 4 in this 4. In this example, you get a lot coarser mesh, but this doesn't really look right. So the scale that we had, for me 0.0001 is the scale that we want in my case, but you have to check for your case in particular. So we've got 94,000 faces removed. Now the next step is to go into sculpt mode again. I'll just press A first because we don't want, I'll just go to object mode, sorry, and press A to not have this mesh selected. You'll see why later on. And go into sculpt mode. Now we're going to be fixing up some holes and some ugly spots. So we really want to see our mesh as it will appear in a render when it's smooth shaded. So under dynamic topology you can press smooth shading. There you go, and have dynamic topology on. And another nice thing to do is if you press N, you go to this transform panel. You can hit under shading matte cap and then click this little icon. There's a bunch of different types of shading that you can choose. Ones that I really like are, for example, this red one, which makes it look really shiny. But you can really see all the mistakes, all the faults in your mesh. Another nice one is this gold metal looking shader. But in this case I'll be using the reddish brown sculpting clay, which is an often used material. It looks really nice, looks really natural. So that's what we'll be working on. Alright, so let's have a look. If you zoom into our mesh, you can see that there are some ugly spots, some black spots. Now the easiest way to fix this is go into sculpt mode under the brushes, select the smooth brush, and just click or drag over these little spots. And you can see that these spots just easily disappear. Just pressing a couple of times. Now sometimes smoothing isn't enough. For example, if I go smoothing over here, you can see that the mesh is well, it's looking wrong. I can't really fix this by smoothing it. So in this case I actually want to do some retopology. To see what I'm doing, I'm going to enable under the objects tab here, draw all edges and wire, and now you can see the mesh underneath the sculpting. So if I press smooth, nothing's happening just because we've got a really weird topology over here. So I'll go into the sculpt brushes and select the sculpt and draw brush with a strength of 0. Now what this will do if I click, it'll just retopologize the area that I click on and make it look a lot better. So now we've got this awesome geometry, and it just fixes all of the bad meshing. So you can just have a look around your model, check all the places, and see if you can fix it that way. So just use the draw brush a couple of times, and then if you need some smoothing. It's easier when the wireframing is off. So I'll just turn it off and continue around the whole model. One thing I forgot to mention is you can go to the sculpt and draw brush and select it, and then go back and then select the smooth brush, click again, go back, draw brush, but that takes quite a while. So the easiest thing is to always have the draw brush selected and then use the shift key to go into smoothing. So if I press, for example, if I turn the strength on and do this, you can see that I draw, and if I press shift, you can see that I smooth out the geometry. I'll just undo that real quick, we don't need that. So I just like to have the strength on 0, click a bunch of times, and if I need, press shift and smooth the area out a little bit. Just alternate between these two brushes until you've got no more ugly spots. Now one more thing, when you've got trouble finding your way around the model, moving the camera around, it's a great idea to go into the file and then user preferences, and under the interface turn on auto depth and zoom to mouse position. This gives you a camera system of moving the camera around that looks a lot like SolidWorks. And I guess since you're doing this assignment, you're used to SolidWorks, so it's a great idea to turn those on. I'll just finish up with this. Now another thing that might happen is having these really long stretch faces. If I go into the wireframe mode again, you can see that these faces are really long and stretched. And that shows up in the rendering as well. As you can see, it's got this stripy look. So just the same thing, draw brush on 0 strength, draw over it a couple of times, and then as needed use the smooth brush to smooth out the geometry. Now one more thing that you might come across is holes appearing in your mesh. So you can see this little hole here. That's just the result of the remove doubles feature that we used a couple minutes ago. So to fix these, you should go into the edit mode, press A a bunch of times until everything is selected, and then press space to enter the search function, and we're going to use a function called fill holes. So just type in fill holes, and that's what we need. Press enter, and this will try to fill in all holes that have a circumference that is no bigger than, in this case, 4 sides. Now sometimes we've got a bit bigger holes, so I like to make this this number a bit bigger, and just use something. Oh, I hope it's not gonna crash. No. Use something like a value of 15 sides. Just press enter on that, and that should nicely fill in your hole. Sometimes you've got flip normals again. Remember that in the last video we've got flip normals when the way that one of the faces is pointing is the wrong way around. So you're looking at the back of the face from the outside of the model. That's not what we want. So just for flipping the normals, press Ctrl N, and it'll recalculate all of the normals. And well, your hole should be closed, and you can just continue your work. Oh, one thing. When you use the fill holes function, Dyn Topo turns off automatically. I don't know why, but that's just, I don't know, a bug. Is it supposed to do this? I'm not sure. Just make sure you turn on dynamic topology again before you continue your work. Now, one more thing that might happen, sometimes you've got faces that are quite big and you retopologize them on a really small scale. So for example, that's something that's happened here. If I turn on the wire again, you can see that there were some flat faces over here, for example, like a big triangular face here. I retopologized it with a bunch of faces, but they're all in that same plane as the face that used to be there was. So a great way to fix this is, again, just go over it with the draw brush and maybe smooth it out a little bit. One more area that's happened a lot is, for example, here when we're using a really small brush to add these veins over a bit bigger faces, and you can still see the bigger faces popping up in between them. So just use the draw brush or press shift for the smoothing brush and just smooth away all of these ugly faces. They don't look natural, so we want to get rid of them. So yeah, I think we're nearly there. Your mesh doesn't have to be completely perfect. Most printing software can handle with a few little holes, and it won't really bother us a lot with texture painting. I had one persistent little hole, so I'm gonna go into edit mode again. Press A bunch of times and so everything's selected. Use the spacebar to go in the search function, fill holes, and see if that fixes it. It takes a little while to calculate where the holes are and how to fill them. And there we go. Alright, I'm not worrying about the inside of the mouth too much, because that won't show up in our render anyway. And I'm also not going to do the other side of the model. If you've got a non-symmetrical model, you might have to do that. But my model is perfectly symmetrical, so I like to have the under dynamic topology, have the symmetry on, and just do one of the sides, and the other side should follow. It doesn't follow perfectly. It's possible that there are some ugly spots, like for example, I've got some spots here that we haven't got on this side, or well, maybe we do have those a little bit, but I'm not going to worry about them too much. But we're going to be copying the mesh over to the other side, the exact topology. So to have a symmetrical mesh that's perfectly symmetrical, we're going to use the symmetrize function. So we want to symmetrize the mesh by copying this side over to this side. Now this side is called the minus x side. You can see that in this little triad here. We've got x pointing that way, but we want minus x, so that's actually that way. So under direction, you've got minus x to plus x, and just hit symmetrize. It'll take a second, and then we've got a mesh that's perfectly symmetrical. Now if I go into edit mode, we still have a full mesh. We've got all of the information, well, twice on the same side, just mirrored. So what I want to do is actually remove one of the sides and then apply an intelligent way, a mirror modifier, to just copy them over to the other side. So we don't have to worry about two meshes at the same time, just have it copied automatically. To do this, we're going to select one of the vertices that's perfectly in the middle. For example, this little vertex over here. It's perfectly in the center. We're going to select everything to one side of that vertex. So we're going to press space again to go into the search function and type in axis select. So that's what we want. And it's selecting everything to that side. Now I've got a threshold value. If I increase this threshold, you can see that the more of the faces on one side of the mesh are selected. Now we don't want that. We want only the vertices that are on this line or beyond it, and in the plus x axis. You can change the axis here over anyway. So for this we're going to use a threshold value that's 0 point and then just a bunch of zeros and a 1. And this will select only the vertices that are on that side of the mesh and none of these. So that's great. Now if we remove this side, we'll also be removing the middle vertices, but we still need those, or we'll have a big hole around the model. Like a big seam. That's not what we want. So we're just going to invert the selection by hitting Control I. I think I missed my key there. There we go. And now I've got everything selected on this side, and then just hit X for delete and delete all of the vertices. So there we go. If I go into the object mode, you can see that we've got half a raptor and we can look inside of it. Yay! So the next thing is just applying a mirror modifier. So in the modifiers panel, with of course our Raptor selected, we can add a, where is it, mirror modifier. There you go, looks great. Now it might look a little bit weird around the scene, and that's because Blender is trying to merge vertices that are really close together to have a perfectly a smooth shading across all of it. If I don't merge vertices, then you've got this line appearing, this sharp line. So we want to merge some vertices, but we want to have a smaller threshold value. So that's this value. If I increase this, you can see that Blender will try to merge vertices that are really far apart. That's not what we want. So for this, again, we're going to press 0.00000, just a bunch of zeros, 1. And there we go. We've got merged vertices and we've got perfect shading across the model. So that's great. You can always turn this off and just... Oh, I think my camera turned off again. Sorry, it does that sometimes. So what was I saying? Oh yeah, you can always turn off this mirror modifier to have even less geometry in your scene if your PC is a little bit slower or just is choking on all of the geometry in the scene. But you can leave this on normally, because we only have half of the mesh that we used to have. So yep, that's looking great. Next thing we're going to do is remove some of the faces. Right now, because we use the sculpting tools and the dynamic topology, all of our faces are triangular. They're all triangles. Now, when you look at these triangles, you can make up, for example, these two triangles make a nice square. And if we make that a square, none of the actual detail will be lost. So we can just remove almost half of the faces and join these into squares and have even lighter mesh. So for this, we'll press A until everything's selected in edit mode, of course. And the shortcut here is Alt-J. So press Alt-J, and there we go. We've got a bunch of square faces. We still got some triangles, but that's fine. We removed a whole lot of the faces in the process without losing any detail. So that's great. The next step is to unwrap the model. Unwrapping means that you take the model, cut it up into small pieces, and then take these pieces and stretch them a little bit until they're flat on a square texture. And then if you paint on that texture, where you painted will be mapped onto the 3D surfaces according to the way you cut up these faces. So it'll become clear if you just watch along. So I'll go into the edit mode for this, select all of the geometry, so press A couple of times to make sure everything's selected. Press U for unwrap, and then use a smart UV project. So this will just cut up the faces, cut up the model according to some rules. We don't have to do it manually. You could do it manually, and that actually would be a bit better, but it would take a really long time because we've got a really ugly mesh actually with a lot of triangles and squares and just faces that aren't aren't easily cut up. So we'll just have it be done automatically. So for the angle limits, I'll turn this to 50. Now this will just cut up the mesh into smaller pieces, make more cuts, but also have more of the area of our texture used. It doesn't really matter what that really does. Just lower that value again to have a lot more different islands, cut up islands, and be more efficient in your texture. That's the only thing we want to change, and we press OK. Now this might take a while, trying to calculate where to put the cuts and where to arrange these pieces onto the 2D texture. So just give this a minute. Depending on your model, it might take a little bit longer or be really quick. I've done this a couple of times, so it should be ready quite soon. There we go. It stopped loading. Now to see how this model was unwrapped, we can drag this little triangle around to the left. And now we've got two windows, two viewports. Now under here we can change this viewport to be the UV/image editor, and we can have a look at how our model was unwrapped. So these are all of the faces. If I zoom into that, you might be able to make out some details. For example, this is probably a piece from the tail. And I think, well, this one kind of looks like a head, I'm not sure, with the eye over here perhaps. You've got a hind leg here. And just a bunch, a big bunch of small little cutouts. You don't need to worry about them, but when we go to make a new texture, it'll always be this unwrap that we'll be using for texturing. So don't worry about that too much. It's looking great. So the next thing is to paint, but we need something to paint on. We haven't got an image to paint on. So the first thing to do is add an image. For this, we'll go under the images here, press new, give it an appropriate name. So for example, Raptor color will do. Now for the resolution, I want to make it a bit bigger to have finer detail on our model. So right now we'll make a texture of 1000 by 1000 pixels, but I'll just make it 4 times that big. Well, 4 times, so 16 times bigger. So I'll just multiply this value by 4 by typing in a star and then a 4. That'll give us 4096 faces. We want to have a square texture, because we unwrapped the model onto a square texture before. So just, not 2 times, 4 times. Awesome. And I also want to give this this texture a color that resembles our end result. So I'll just get a little bit brighter here and drag this little circle around until we've got a color that's about correct. So maybe a little bit brownish, greenish. So that's the color that we'll be using. Okay, that's great. Press OK, and now we can see the texture that we've made. There's just a colorless texture, well, just one solid color, but it doesn't show up on our model yet. So to do this, we need to apply a new material. I'll first go into the object mode to have a good look at our model. I'll turn off matte cap, because matte cap will always take over any shading that you've got. So just turn off matte cap, go into the materials panel and add a new material. Now it's just a diffuse material, don't worry about it. But under color, you want to press this little circle and use an image texture for the color of our model. And then under here, you can select the texture that we've made earlier. Alright, still not appearing. To have the texture appearing on our model, we need to press the shading type here and go into texture or material, but texture is the fastest. And now we finally got our texture mapped on there. So that's looking great. Now, really important, you always have to save your blend file, of course, by hitting Ctrl S or go to the file and then save button. But we also need to save our texture. We need to save this texture separately, so anytime you want to quit, or just, it's a good idea to do this a couple of times while you're working, every 5 or 10 minutes. Go into the image here, into the image tab, and do press save as image. Now you can choose where you want to save it. For me, that's on the part 3 of the RAPTOR series. I was using color, I don't know, color V2. Just give it an appropriate name. We'll be saving it as a PNG file, but that should be on automatically. And we'll save this as an image. Perfectly. Now when we go into our file directory, let's have a look. There we go. On our file directory, we can see the image that we'll be using. If one was still here, we can delete that one. This is the one that we'll be using. So that's just a simple square image. But it hasn't got any color on it. Now, in the next video, I'll be teaching you how to texture paint this with colors and some textures as well. But if you want to have some fun already, I'll show you how. We don't need this anymore, so we can just make it a bunch smaller, or just delete it by pressing the right click and then join area and have the pointer point that way. But the best thing to do is just have it really small so we can access it quickly later. If you don't see your texture anymore, by the way, you can always press this button at the bottom and press Raptor Color. So that's the texture we'll be working on. Make that a bit smaller. And to texture paint, we'll go into the texture paint mode. We'll take a fancy color. I'll just take a hot pink for now so you can clearly see what I'm doing. And just start drawing on top of your model. You can just move around and draw. And whenever you're drawing in the 3D viewport, your drawing should also appear on your 2D drawing, on your 2D texture. So you can see that as I'm texturing, painting on here, the texture appears in 2D on our 2D texture. So many textures. So yeah, you can always have some fun like this. But in the next video I'll be teaching you, like I said, 2 methods of texture painting your model a bit better. So yeah, that's basically it. As you can see, the texture copies to the other side of the model. That's because we have this mirror modifier. If I turn this off, we just got half of the model. You might want to turn it off sometimes because painting goes a little bit faster when this mirror modifier isn't on, because it doesn't have to show the texture being painted on 2 sides at once. Also, when you're painting, try to paint on the faces that are facing toward you, and don't go painting like this onto the edge of your model, because if you turn around you can see that the paint falls off in a really weird way. So always try to be painting on faces that you can clearly see and not go over the edges. Also be careful when I'm painting like this, for example, on this finger, and I want to make these fingers pink. You can see that the texture shoots all the way through the model and appears on the legs as well. So do be careful of that. Yeah, and just have some fun with this. Choose some colors, choose some blending types. For example, if I go to multiply and use a light greenish texture, you can see that it makes our mesh a little bit darker, our texture a little bit darker. Yeah, and have some fun. So I'm gonna leave you here. Well, I'll be fixing up this this pink mess really easily first by going here into the 2D texture, press paint here, select the color that we were using here. So for this I'm going to press this little button, use the eyedropper tool to select this color, put the blending type on mix with a strength of 100, press F to scale up the brush. I know it's a bunch of shortcuts, you don't have to remember all of these, you can always use the radius over here if you want that, but I'll just be painting all of this hot pink color over with some green. There we go, no more pink. So yeah, have some fun, and I'll see you next week where I'll be doing texture painting. I wish you good luck, and I'll see you in the next video. Well, thanks a lot for watching. If you've got any questions, don't forget to post something in the comments below on YouTube, or go to my Facebook page and post something in the 3D Pilot page. You can always send me a message via 3D Pilot as well, but I prefer if you post a screenshot, because when I answer you, when I give you some tips on your model, it might help some others. So we want to work on this together. So yeah, I'll be leaving you. Thanks a lot for watching, and see you in the next one. Ciao!